All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network's Going Solo Veterans Corner. I'm back as your host, retired Army First Sergeant and author Paul Holbert from Northern Virginia. And for those of you who have been following the show, you know that our goal is to highlight our veterans, their careers, their lives, and what they're doing now and back when they're back in their civilian lives, and what they're doing to make a difference in our community. So we're going to get to our guest in just a moment. But before we do, I want to thank our show sponsors, Quest Jewelers of Fairfax, Virginia. Whether it's quality jewelry or a special custom-made piece, if you can contact Pete or Wantain, the owners of Quest Jewelers, they'll be glad to help you out. They have some beautiful pieces, and I can speak from personal experience as I have actually had several custom pieces made by them. They do excellent work, and you'll see their website and their information here on the show. I also want to thank our other show sponsor, Nationwide IT Services. NIS is a service-disabled, veteran-owned, and small certified 8A small business by the Small Business Administration. CK Park and his crew there provide professional services in the terms of business management, operations, IT, training, and other professional organizational management support. So if you're in the need for those types of services, call CK Park and his crew at Nationwide IT, and they'll be more than happy to help you. So again, thank you to our show sponsors for sponsoring our veterans program. So I want to get to our guest tonight. Dale Woodie is a retired Air Force uh, Chief Master Sergeant and actually a licensed pilot who spent 25 years in the service before retiring in 2006. He spent a career in training and supervising other service members and currently works in Washington, D.C. for the federal government. Dale holds a Master's of Education, a Certificate of Instructional System Design, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Professional Aeronautics and Safety. He also holds 4 FAA certificates, as I mentioned, including a pilot certification, flight engineer turboprop, an advanced ground instructor in airframe and power plant certification. So Dale, I want to welcome you to the show. And with all those certifications, it seems like, you hardly have time to do anything else.
Well, thank you, Paul, for having me on tonight. Yeah, it may seem like a lot, but that's accumulated of many certificates over the years of my Air Force career.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of people say the same thing too. It seems like our military folks, when we retire from the service, of course, we go on to other careers. And it seems like it takes a long time to slow down. And I've had people ask me when I was going to stop or slow down. And looking at all the things that you've done, it seems like you're still going strong. And I know that you actually joined the Air Force right out of high school, didn't you?
Yeah, the story of that is I grew up in Cabot, Arkansas, which is located about 5 miles east of Little Rock Air Force Base, right in the flight path of Little Rock Air Force Base. So I grew up there, and the C-130s were stationed there. I think they came in around 1970. So ever since I was about 6 or 7 years old, I'd seen the C-130 Hercules fly over my house, not ever realizing one day that I'd be in there flying to the schoolhouse at Little Rock Air Force Base. But strange things happen. But yeah, towards the end of my high school senior year, it's about 1980 and 81, I graduated in 81. Reagan was running for office, and one of the things he had spoken about was, bringing back the registration for the draft, because it had gone away for a while.
Yeah.
And I had memories of the Vietnam War on the nightly news. It's back when they had 3 channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS, with the anchors every night. And just remember, as early on as I could remember when that started happening in the 60s, all the way up until we pulled out. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, he's going to bring back the registration. I might get drafted. So, at the time I was 17 years old. So I decided, without my dad's assistance or anybody's help, I wasn't in ROTC in high school, junior ROTC. So, back then we all had our hair, it's kind of long, and that was, not exactly something we wanted to do, is cut off our hair and be an Air Force junior ROTC. But to have it to do over again, I think I would have joined that program if I'd known what it was about. And I'll tell a little bit more about that story later, as I later became an Air Force junior ROTC instructor.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I joined in February 1981, just a few months before I graduated. Went down and became a crew chief on KC-135s. At the time, it was a 431 X-52 or 52E. And then later on, they changed that career field in the Air Force to 2 Alpha 5. So that's where I started out. Spent 3 years there with the Guard while I was going to college after I graduated at Arkansas State University. And then, of course, you know, things happen. I got married, and I needed a job. So I transferred. Luckily, I was fortunate because there was a big shortage of crew chiefs in the active duty Air Force. It's not the easiest thing to do, to transition from the Guard to active duty. It's much easier to go from active duty to Guard, but the other way is it's very difficult because they treat you as prior service. But like I said, during the 80s, they were starting the drug program, testing program. There were a lot of people leaving the Air Force because of drugs, and it worked out for me. So, you know, I put in for a few bases. I think one of them was Tinker over in Oklahoma City, Barksdale Air Force Base, and maybe Blytheville, because Blytheville was also up that way. And of course, I also put in for Little Rock. But they sent me to Barksdale Air Force Base, so off I went in 1983 to Barksdale, and crewed KC-135s there for 3 years. And that kind of launched my career, because my intention at the time was to go down there and get some experience, and then come back to the Guard, my home state, and get a technician job, or some people call them arts job in the reserve. That might be a more familiar term. But hey, I got there and I like this. This was a lot of fun. I mean, I was really enjoying the Air Force. Of course, I'd already seen the Guard, and I'm on a crew chief van, you know, riding around the flight lines, you know, catching airplanes and fueling them up, fixing them, turning them around for the next flight. And a lot of the guys there at my age at the time, I was, I guess I was about 20, and they couldn't understand why I had to leave the Guard and come to active duty Air Force. And all they talked about is how bad it was. Of course, none of these young men had ever really worked a job other than the Air Force. They went out of high school to the Air Force, so they really didn't have any experience. And I'd had some experience working with my dad, building houses, you know, as a 16, 17-year-old, swinging a hammer in the summer. And of course, working in the Guard and doing a part-time grocery sacking job at the IGA store, paying minimum wage at the time, $3.35 an hour. But that was okay because I made a car payment and, you know, enough money to take my girlfriend out. I think I grossed maybe.
Know that's important, right?
Yeah, I think at the time I was doing 20 hours a week, and I think I'd walk away with like $50 or $60, you know, a week, or maybe not even that much, with 20 hours. But yeah, I decided to stay. And of course, I always wanted to fly. I wanted to do something, you know, flying wise. That's kind of why I wanted to stay in the Guard and be a pilot. But I found it very difficult to continue school. I did try that, but having a young child and a wife and pulling alert duty at that time, because that's back when we had the Cold War. And of course, we had all the B-52s and KC-135s pulling alert at that time. So I tried that, didn't work. But one night I'm on the ships, and a C-130 came in on an in-flight emergency. We call those IFEs, and I was tasked to go out there and help them tow the airplane, and I did. And here's these two enlisted guys in flight suits, and I was already familiar with the boom operator on a KC-135, but that really just didn't. I don't know. I guess it didn't appeal to me as much. But so I asked these guys. I said, "Well, where are you guys from?" They said, "Little Rock." I said, "Little Rock, that's where I'm from. I'm from Cabot." Of course, they know that very well because they fly over the Navy there at Cabot, the Tonyville NDB. So what do you do? And he said, "Well, I'm a load master." "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a flight engineer." So, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, I sit up here in the front." You know, of course, the C-130, the flight engineer sits between the pilot and co-pilot, slightly behind them, but in the middle. It's got the best seat in the house, right? And our panel is overhead here versus the traditional flight engineer where they'd be sitting sideways, you know, off to the right. So, yeah, go down, check that out. So I did, and guess what? The timing was perfect because there was a huge shortage of flight engineers that year. So 3 years later, 1986, off I went. I cross-trained, and they give me some bases of a preference. And of course, what do you think I chose? I put down Little Rock, the largest C-130 base in the world with 75 or 80 airplanes there. And where do they put me? West Texas, Dyess Air Force Base.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So I went from being 200 miles from home to 600 miles from home out in West Texas. So I went out there and I, enjoyed West Texas. Great people, great place, great community to live in. It was totally different coming out of the, Louisiana, forest and going out to West Texas where mesquite trees were not very tall and it was very dry, lots of storms. So I was trying to get to the schoolhouse. I wanted to become an instructor and go to the schoolhouse. So I really couldn't do that. They wouldn't move. Most of us guys, when we got stationed as aircraft mechanics, you stayed there for a long time. If you're a flight engineer, you stayed at, one of the big three bases. You're a C5 guy, you were either at Altus, East Coast or West Coast. You're a Herc guy on 130s, you're either at Pope, Little Rock, or Dyess. That was your options. And they didn't do much internal assignments. So you could easily be there 10, 15 years. So my only way out of that, according to FPC, was to take an assignment overseas. So I did, and I went to Germany, Rhine-Main, Germany in 1986. I'm sorry, I would guess 1989. So 86 to 89 in Dyess. And they actually that one was a special assignment. So I was on what they called a MC 130E Talon 1, which there were only 14 of them in the Air Force fleet, and they were very, specially designed special missions. And these are the ones that most of your audience might be familiar with that were in the John Wayne movie, the Green Beret movie. Had the Fulton recovery system on the front.
Oh,
the yokes that come out, then they're the balloon. They drop out the package. The package would be inflated to put a harness on.
Yep.
You come back in and extract your package, whether it was designed to extract personnel.
Yeah.
So that was a very interesting mission because it had a crew of 10 instead of a crew of 4. Because you had an EWO and a couple of load masters, a radio operator, and 2 navigators up front because it had terrain avoidance radar. So after that, I was able to have another choice in my assignment because it was up, and I loved the mission and I loved flying. And the guys were great, very small unit, and they were moving to England at the time on the new Talon 2, which is amazing because that came on board in 1992, and it's retired now. It's gone, and I was like, wow, I've outlived the whole airframe, and that's makes you feel old, But the B-52 is still flying.
Yeah, it sure is.
My dad actually worked at Boeing on that one. When he got out of the Air Force, he was building them when I was born. So it's kind of amazing that I'm still flying. Yeah. But I put in for an assignment, and luckily I finally got back to Little Rock. Yeah, so there I went in 1992 back to Little Rock Air Force Base and became an instructor in the schoolhouse. And that was great because I was back home with my parents, built a house. Kids got familiar with grandma and grandpa, living right behind them.
Yeah.
And,
I was just going to say, you started out so young, and in fact, it's kind of funny because listening to your story, I did construction work in my younger days too. And then you and I actually joined the military. I joined about a month before you in 1981. So we joined the military right about the same time. Yeah. So, of course, I did about 21 years. I know you did 25, but then it's kind of very similar. I came down through a number of assignments, and then the next thing you know, I get an assignment, go to an instructor training course, and I'm a certified military instructor at Fort Benning. So, I'm just sitting here listening to your story, and I'm going, wow, there are definitely some similarities there.
Yeah.
So how did you like the training once you got into it?
Oh, I loved training. It was kind of a break because I went from like 12-hour missions, in the air, mainly all at night, from, taking off at dark and land, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, to these training missions that were 5-hour missions. And for the first year, 5 hours only felt like an hour. But the second and third year, when you're out there doing transitions, because mainly in the 16th TATS at the time, or Tactical Aero Training Squadron, they mainly were not airdrop. They were just mainly, you know, initial pilot qual, initial nav qual, initial flight engineer, initial load master. So most of those were, you know, we'd take off out of Little Rock and we'd go to a nearby base within 100, 150 miles and do transitions for 5 hours and come back home. And if you
Oh
were
God.
unlucky, yeah, if you were unlucky, you did 5 hours in the local pattern. You didn't get any, you know, hour flight time to and from, you know, let's say Shreveport or Memphis.
You know what that reminds me of? Yeah, when I was in the 101st, and we'd get these alerts, and we'd show up with our bags. They'd take us to the airfield. They'd put us on the back of planes. We'd take off, not knowing where we were going, fly around for 2 hours, and come back and land at the airfield and go right back to our units. Oh, they used to drive us crazy.
And
So
probably
yeah,
did
I
all that
can.
low level too, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one time they actually had us. They literally had us loading some of our equipment onto the planes,
Yeah.
which took, hours. And we get out, we take off, we go flying around for about an hour, and then we turn around and go right back.
Yeah.
So yeah, that used to drive us crazy. So I can kind of identify of just looping and then, not really going anywhere.
No, but it does remind me of a few missions. We used to go out to Pope, or we go down to Fort Benning, and mainly we've got to Pope, you know, and the paratroopers would load up in the 82nd, and you would fly around for 4 hours on a low level because it's part of our training, part of theirs too. They didn't like that. They just wanted to go up and, you know, jump out and over.
Yeah.
For 4 hours of bounce around in North Carolina
Oh yeah.
mountains, you know, at 300 feet, bumping around. They were ready to get out of the aircraft, but yeah, I never envied them in the back because I don't know how they stood it. It was hot, bouncy. They were throwing up.
Well,
There's a
usually
lot.
what I hear from you Air Force guys that are flying around in the planes, I always get that question, what makes you crazy enough to want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be bouncing around in the back of it after a while. I never had to do that. Whenever I went up and jumped, it was always fairly quick. So, I was spared from all the bouncing
Yeah.
around for too long.
Well, there was an old joke. They'd say, well, yeah, because I get $110 in jump pay. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Well, I get $175 a month for staying in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard all of those, and people still wonder why the heck you want to jump out of a perfectly good plane. And yeah, to this day, I sit and look back on it and go, yeah, why did I want to do that?
Hey, but I will tell you, to the paratroopers out there and the airborne, hey, I got a lot of respect for you, a lot of admiration for you. You know, we don't understand it sometimes, but you know, that's what you chose to do. That's what your nature, you know, what was calling you.
Yeah.
And everybody that I was around that did that type of work, they were just really enthused. You know, especially as they moved on up in the ranks and they did a lot of halos and got into special, you know, missions and stuff.
Well, I think that's your comment like that is one of the things, one of the, how can I say, one of the tenets of camaraderie among veterans. It doesn't matter where you served or who you served with. Every person had their reason or their experiences.
That's
And I
right.
think, veterans all recognize that and they all respect that. So, that's something that, I think veterans share together is that those shared experiences, or at least the understanding of those shared experiences. So yeah, it does, I think, make a difference. Well, you mentioned earlier that once you got into training, and I know you finally retired. Let's see, what year was it you retired? I'm sorry, I completely
Well,
forgot. 2006, right?
yeah. Now prior to
Yeah,
that, because I left
yeah.
Little Rock, which was a hard thing to do. My father had just passed away, but there was believe it or not, after only being there a few years, I was on the short list to get moved again. And guess where they wanted to send me back to? They wanted to send me back to Dias, and I didn't want to go there. So everybody else in front of me could retire. They had they could opt out of the assignment. So there was like 15 people in front of me, and I was like number 2 on the list. And I'm like, well, if I'm number 2 on the list, and I don't take this good deal to Randolph Air Force Base at 19th Air Force, there's no telling where I might end up, you know. And I'm not going to roll the dice. And so I took an assignment to 19th Air Force, a numbered Air Force. It's our training command. They had just stood it up. Little Rock had just transitioned from Air Mobility Command for the training unit into Air Education and Training Command. And so they were brand new positions. And the two E8s on our base didn't want to go. Good for them, because I went and spent 5 years down there going out and inspecting all the AETC flying units, including fighter units, C-130s, or not the C-130s, but the C-5s, C-17s at Altas. And I ended up getting my last two stripes there in 5 years, the E8 Senior Master Sergeant and E9, the Chief Master Sergeant.
Yeah.
And of course, that last stripe, it came with another assignment. So
yeah, they usually do at that point. So you finally, you finally decided to make that decision and jump and retire. And what I want to do, I'm going to take a short break. But when we come back, you had mentioned earlier about how you got back into junior ROTC as an instructor. So I want to talk about that a little bit right after our break. So we'll be right back.
All right.
All right, welcome back. And you're on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, Veterans Corner. And we are talking with our guest tonight, retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant Dale Woodie. And before the break, Dale was telling us about his 26-year Air Force career and how he made the shift into training. And one of the interesting things he mentioned earlier was that he had looked at an Air Force ROTC program when he was younger, and then ended up, after he retired, getting into Air Force ROTC as an instructor. So Dale, can you tell us a little bit about that and how you got into it?
Yeah, after I retired in 2006 from Andrews Air Force Base, I had a short stint with the railroad, and that wasn't working out with my younger son being a teenager. So I really wanted to teach. My mother was a teacher for 30 years. And this opportunity came up, and I looked into it, and it was again, everything's always really kind of worked out for me. I guess that's where I kind of looked at it. But that year in Prince William County, Virginia, that's where I live, out here in Haymarket, Virginia, they stood up 4 ROTC, junior ROTC units, Air Force ROTC units in the county, which is really unheard of to get that many at one time, because there's a long list. So at any rate, it was about 50 miles. At that time, I was living in DC. And so I commuted out here to Haymarket, and I applied. Of course, you apply through, not Gunner, but in Alabama, I can't remember, Montgomery. There's a base there, but I can't remember the name of it now. And applied and got an interview, came out here, and got selected and worked with another lieutenant colonel. And that was a really awesome experience for the 4 years I spent out here at the school, working with these young young kids, high school kids.
Yeah, I know my oldest grandson spent a year in Air Force Junior ROTC, and then he switched to some other electives. And I'm not sure if he's going to go back to it, but he sure seemed to enjoy it. So, can you share with us, what were some of the things you did with the students?
Yeah, well, so the Air Force Junior ROTC program, which after I got into it and I started teaching, the curriculum, because they provide all the books, they actually pay half your salary. You're retired. You're no longer in the military, but you're retired. And yes,
Yeah,
you do wear the uniform. Yes, you still have to meet all the, the requirements of your haircut and dress and personal appearance. But they provide all the materials, the books, and aerospace science basically consists of leadership skills and then the study of aerospace, whether it's space itself with rockets or the history of aviation and aircraft. So we have a lot of good skills in that course. They taught a lot of skills such as manners and proper eating and etiquette. So
yeah,
a lot of including myself. I mean, I'm reading the book, and there's a lot of things I learned myself about etiquette
good.
that I didn't know. We just don't know if you don't have you know the knowledge in your family. I don't. Growing up in Arkansas, I'm
You
sure
had to
we didn't.
learn the niceties of the Emily Post when you were at the table, right?
Yeah, yeah, and where to walk along the street. The
Yeah.
lady goes up and down the stairs. We taught a lot of that stuff, and so that was really fun. But my probably my best experience was because I had my advanced ground instructor certificate. Is I taught a private pilot ground school, and
Oh,
that was a special class for seniors. If you were qualified, the ROTC would provide you with the books and materials. We had Jeppesen books, and so I basically did a certified, ground school Part 61 type stuff. I mean certified as an advanced ground instructor. So I did that for a couple of years, and what really was really nice about that, I had about five or six students. Some of them went on to the military and flying in the Army and the Air Force. A couple of them are flying in the airlines now.
oh,
And I think that's kind of rewarding for me to know I had kind of a hand at that. Obviously, they were interested in that career, but
yeah.
spending a whole year going through ground school and teaching you all the things you need to take on your knowledge test. Later on, when they did go to college and they did enter the military training, I'm sure a lot of that came back and that exposure. But I tell people this: that was probably the most rewarding fruit of my career was
Mm,
going into high
yeah.
school and working with these kids. Because today I still maintain, a very close friendship with all of it. They literally, friendship with them. They look up to you, and they're very. And most kids today are very respectful in school. Yeah,
Yeah.
you see the news, you see what they're talking about, but for the most part, the kids are no different than you and I were. It's just we've grown up and we look at it with a different eye after having kids.
Yeah.
But I always look forward to Mondays, and I hated to see Fridays come. So when you can say
Oh.
that, you're in the right place. They
Yeah.
kept
So
me energized and pumped.
well, it really sounds like you said, that was something that was near and dear to you. As it appears, the aviation profession is overall, because now you're continuing on in professional aviation, and you continue to select second career doing similar type of work. So, can you share with us a little bit about what you're doing now?
I sure can. And since you saw continuing education, so when I did get out of the Air Force, I'd already finished my bachelor's in science, but then I went on after I started teaching high school. I thought, well, I may not always want to be an Air Force junior ROTC instructor. I might want to teach some other type of subject matter. So I went back and got my master's in education at George Mason University.
Ah,
And that's kind of how I did that. And then, I kind of had a longing for aviation again. I was doing the same thing over and over each year in high school. Some of my buddies from Andrews that I served with had been hired by the FAA. And I'm like, hey, what's that about? Because I said I'd never work for the federal government. I also said I'd never live in it.
uh,
I also said I'd never live in DC or
yeah,
Oklahoma City. And I've done all three thus far. But yeah,
yeah,
I put in an application with my training background in the Air Force and my certificates, uh, aircraft certification service, which is part of the line of business. We call it aviation safety. It's one of the major lines of business in the FAA. So aircraft cert Certification Training Development hired me that year, and that was 2010. And that's how I came on board with FAA. And aircraft search really basically it's the oversight of the the standards and the govern the design, production, and airworthiness of aircraft engines and propellers. So a lot of that work is done by designees in the field that are authorized to do work on our behalf. It's just most of the aircraft engineers, aircraft certification engineers I work with oversee that work, oversee the designee, not necessarily the work itself. And then of course we also have manufacturing aviation safety inspectors. Many of them have a military background and a manufacturing quality assurance background that come on and work in the field office throughout the United States as well.
Yeah, so you're conducting training for a lot of those people, aren't you, or developing training for them?
Yes. So I came on board and we develop a lot of training. We send a lot of them out to the FAA Academy, which is located in Oklahoma City. That's the main, it's one of the larger centers of the FAA other than DC. And that's where mainly the air traffic controllers are all trained, aircraft certification personnel, the flight standards personnel are all trained out there. So we developed training. And so while I was in, again, this is an opportunity for continuing development. Yes, I did training. I helped with designers when they were designing the curriculum for the C-130 schoolhouse. But when I came on board the FAA, I was working with what they call an instructional system specialist or an instructional system designer. Most of those had backgrounds in education, but it's just another step where they learn the systematic approach to training development, such as the ADDIE model, which was developed by the military, and all of our military training has been based on that since the 40s. So I went back and I didn't get a master's in that, but I got a certificate. There was no reason to get a master's. So I did that just so I could, have other opportunities with the FAA to, develop training. And I spent a little time there, and I went over to flight standards side of the house, which is mainly my background, flying and maintenance. And the inspectors, of course, do a lot of flying, but they do a lot of oversight of Part 147 training centers, 145 repair facilities, 141 schools, flying schools. So they do a lot of the oversight, ramp inspections of the daily operations of airlines to make sure the flying, the public is safe.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, I know you have an important job because you are one of the people that helps ensure the responsibility of safety for the flying public in the work that you do. And I mean, you've carried out that career in aviation from, the Air Force now into your civilian life. But one of the things I found interesting was, I mean, and I had heard it in a couple of stories before, but you went so far as to get your pilot certification, right?
Yeah, and I did that my last few years at Randolph Air Force Base back in '98, because my plans then was I was going to retire and just remain in the area. I wasn't really expected to, go on to make chief. I just had planned to, hey, I'm at this age. I was around 42. I wanted, the airlines were hiring. It was a big boom. This is a little bit before 9/11, before everything crashed. But yeah, I was pursuing my commercial and certificate when I got promoted. Then I moved to DC, and it was very difficult to fly and continue on with my new job as group superintendent. And so I let that go. That's kind of how that happened with the pilot part of it.
So have you thought about trying to pick it back up now that you maybe have slowed down a little bit, or no, not today, right?
No, I just turned 58, and a little too old to be doing. I haven't flown in probably 10 or 11 years, and it's very expensive, and I'm very happy. It's just some things that are meant for you, and some things are not, and I just don't think that was in the cards for me. But I did enjoy flying the little Cessna 172s, and it helped. Having a certificate, the A&P, the Airframe and Power Plant certificate, came along with my crew chief duties, and I went back and took the test, and had an oral and practical for that, as well as the the pilot, as well, and the flight engineer. But they've all, even though I haven't used them directly, they've all come back to enhance my ability to get jobs.
Well, it's I guess I can kind of understand that, because At the time, jumping out of planes seemed like a good idea. But then after I got older, I looked at it and says, boy, I'm glad I don't do that anymore. And, now that I'm getting ready to turn 62, I look at it and say, boy, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Because your body starts to really pay for it after all that time. But no, Dale, I tell you, it sounds like, of course, that you had a very interesting career, and you've given your life to aviation service, whether it's been in the Air Force or now, even at the high school teaching, future military youngsters, and now, of course, continuing to ensure the safety of the flying public in our national airspace. So I just want to take a moment to say, thank you for your service and everything that you've done. And, also for taking the time to come on our show and share your experiences and your stories with us. And before we go, though, I want to ask you, if there's one thought you could leave, whether it's for those young aspiring flyers out there, or some of our other veterans, or if there's a thought you'd like to leave, what would it be?
Well, my thought would be, if you're currently serving, is never stop learning. Always take advantage of everything, every opportunity you have. There's a lot of people that want to avoid leadership school, all the different
Yes.
schools in the various, militaries and Army, Navy, Marines. They don't want to go, but take those opportunities to go, and take those opportunities when they're given to you to go and pursue your college degree. Because what you don't want to do is, you don't want to serve 20 years and not finish your degree and walk out the door without that degree. Now, I will say, if you do have a security clearance and that degree, you're going to walk out probably making more money than you did when you were in the service, if you're in certain areas like the Washington, D.C. area. So I would just say, don't stop learning, and don't put things off, and don't be caught off guard, because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. And having those credentials or anything behind you always gives you a backup plan.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you know what? And that's very true to life, because I had to go back to school while I was still on active duty to finish my education. And I remember those long nights and weekends, all weekend in class to do it. But when I retired, it was definitely worth it. So thank you, Dale. That is definitely some good advice to our audience. And, we want to thank Dale for coming on to the show, and sharing his information with us. And for those of you that are still out there, I want to remind our veterans that there are some services and some help available to you. So I want to just very briefly share with you tonight the Veterans Canteen Service. You can see the website there at va.gov. The VCS is actually a very good program. It's almost like an Amazon for veterans, because they have discounted prices and shopping for just about everything you could think of. And all you have to do is get on there and qualify. And normally qualifying, they can usually do it through ID Me, which is one of the military identification programs, to verify your veteran status. And once you are verified, you can be given access to the Veterans Canteen Service. And again, they have all kinds of goods and services on there for veterans at discount prices. So for those of you who are out there listening that did not know about the Veterans Canteen Service, I definitely encourage you to take a look and see if it's something you'd be interested in. So I want to thank you tonight for listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. We strive to connect veterans with the community and share their stories. And for our veterans out there, again, we want to thank you for your service. And we hope that you continue to find your best life after the military and enjoy what you've earned. So again, thank you. I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, and I hope to see you again on our next show. Good night.